Sounds like somebody is having problems.
Try now, Peggy.
Hi, is Will there? One of our speakers can't get in. Can she call him?
What?
Yes.
Which speaker?
It's
Anna. Mm-hmm.
Will, is
Okay.
there a phone number she can call you on?
Yeah.
I'm going to chat you a number, Peggy.
Let's see the chat. Hi.
Hey, Peggy.
Yeah, I think we're about ready to start.
Did Anna get in? Okay, I see her.
Okay. It's 6:30, so we will begin.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October meeting of the Women and Families Committee of Community Board 8. I'm Gail Barron, and I co-chair the committee with Peggy Price. For anyone from the public who's unfamiliar with community boards, our board is comprised of 50 volunteers who advise government leaders on issues of importance to our community. Tonight's forum will address the very timely issue facing New York City workers and employers alike grappling with in-person versus remote work. Once our speakers have completed their presentations, we'll welcome questions and answers. Then Assemblywoman Rebecca C. Wright will join us and lead off the committee discussion concerning the growing threat to abortion rights. Before turning the program over to Peggy, I would like to ask Saida if you would just go through the protocol of housekeeping so that people know how to raise their hand and things of that sort.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. A few notes for you, particularly if this is your first meeting with us. You'll notice that you are muted and unable to unmute yourself. After the presentation, the co-chairs may call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can ask to be recognized by raising your virtual hand. You can do that by going to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and selecting raise hand. It's important not to raise your physical hands or wave around at the screen because we may not be able to see you among participants. If you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute. Once you're recognized by the co-chair, I will unmute you and you may be prompted to confirm unmuting on your device. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you can access the raise hand feature by clicking the participants button on the menu at the bottom of your screen and selecting raise hand. The chat function is available for technical support only, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. You can send me a chat if you're having any technical issues and I can walk you through them. And with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. Peggy?
Yeah, hi, and thank you very much, all of you, for attending tonight. This is very exciting, and we have a sterling panel of speakers to address remote versus in-person working. It's an issue of wide concern. The lifting of lockdowns due to the coronavirus brought varying and sometimes changing policies about how and where to work safely. For example, should workers be called back to the office full time? If so, when? Which employees can continue to work remotely? And how often? And what about employees in jobs that require them to be in the workplace full time? So tonight we'll explore these issues and find out where the trends are heading. The aim is to cut through the confusion and uncertainty so that people can better plan their lives while earning a living. To address the issues, our speakers include Adam Galinsky, Professor of Leadership and Ethics at Columbia Business School, Anna A. Tavis, Academic Director and Professor Human Capital Management at NYU, Tammy Sheffer, Chief People Officer at Solomon Partners, and Sarah Dunn, Global Human Resources Officer at Tapestry, Inc. After their remarks, we will hold a question and answer session between the speakers and the audience. Saida just told you how you'll be able to participate, but for now, we'll begin by hearing from Professor Adam Galinsky of Columbia Business School. So thank you, Adam.
Sure, thank you so much. How much time do I have just so I regulate effectively?
If you could talk around 10 minutes, that would be great.
That'd be great. Good. Okay. First of all, it's a great honor and privilege to be here. I am currently remote from New York City. I'm on my first ever sabbatical that I've ever received from Columbia University, and I'm spending the year in Hawaii. So this is why, hence my aloha shirt. So I've studied the question of remote versus in-person work, thinking about how do we lead in the new hybrid reality, and really thought about a number of different phenomenon. So I'm going to take the perspective that I'm going to share with you as sort of like, how do we lead effectively as an organization, trying to balance the many conflicting demands and needs of a variety of different employees that an organization might have. And I want to start off by just acknowledging a couple of different things. First of all, before the pandemic, most people were in person, and the majority of people said they were remote 0% of the time. And after the pandemic, that completely inverted. So you see this amazing inversion of what was in person versus remote, so that now most people are remote. The second thing that you've probably heard a little about is something called the Great Resignation. And the Great Resignation has just been all over the news, where people are leaving their jobs at a much higher rate. And one of the things that I've said, based on my own research that I've done over 20 years and thinking about the psychology of meaning and turning points, et cetera, is that COVID, I think, has created a universal midlife crisis, where it's really forced people to take a step back and reflect on what they value in life. And when you actually do some surveys of people that have left their job, it's true a number of people have focused on material needs, such as they went to a job that had better pay, for example. But a number of people talked about things that are much more psychological, like feeling valued at the workplace, or feeling that they're in a supportive culture, or feeling that they're recognized and included and belong. And so those are issues that have become much more front and center as people are remote. And they need extra care taken to make people feel recognized. Now, I wrote a book called Friend and Foe that really summarized that there's a fundamental tension that exists that drives all of human nature between cooperation and competition between sort of the group and the individual. But I think that one of the things that we've noticed is that with the remote work, the tension has really come down to being focused on people versus focused on tasks, focused on collaboration versus getting to concentrate on your work, focused on a culture as a whole versus separate fiefdoms and silos, focused on mentorship versus concerns with falling behind. And one of the things that my research has shown is that when we are in a crisis, and COVID was a crisis, we become more short-term in our thinking and more task-focused. So if we go back and think about the Great Resignation, all the people wanting to feel like belonging, connected, included, well, all the leaders and managers who are in a crisis were focused on the task at hand and not on taking care of the people. And so now we're getting back to a world where we're starting to integrate people, where some people will be remote, some people will be in person, and some people will be hybrid, remote part of the time and in-person part of the time. And I want to say just two things about that before I raise a couple of larger issues. The first is that companies that have tried this in the past, Yahoo being the most famous example, found it to be a failure. So Marissa May had a very famous quote when she called all people back to the office and said, to become the absolute best place to become communication, collaboration are important, and we can only do that side by side. So there's this recognition of some of the limitations of the hybrid. The second thing is that the remote versus in-office distinction had a incredibly large status difference in the past, so that remote workers were lower status on average. That means that they were less respected, they got fewer promotions, lower raises. But as I've documented in some of my research, now some people who are remote are the high performers who are high status because they can negotiate for that effectively. So we also have to now recognize that if you're going to have some people remote, some people in person, some person hybrid, there's the status hierarchy that comes into play. And one of the things that I've shown in my research is that basically all the concerns that we have, from fairness and conflict on the one hand, to socializing people and getting them to be committed members of our culture, to selecting the right people for leadership, mentoring them, and really guiding them, and then finally teamwork, diversity, and innovation. These are all the perennial problems of leadership, but they have to be reconsidered in the new hybrid reality. And I want to say a couple of things about that. First of all, that we need to recognize two things. The first is that in-person interaction has an incredible benefit for creating a culture, creating collaboration, creating connections. So to the extent that some people are in office, some people are remote, some people are hybrid, we have to recognize if we're going to socialize people into our culture, if we're going to collaborate effectively, if we're going to provide effective feedback, those things happen more effectively when people are in person. So as we start to construct a new hybrid reality, we have to recognize, how do we maximize our in-person interactions? How do we maximize that? So for example, socialization, I would suggest, has to happen in person. If there's a new project, both the kickoff of that project and maybe the celebration at the end of the project should happen in person, right? When should we give feedback? The data are very clear. It's more difficult to give challenging constructive feedback remotely than it is hybrid. So we know that if we're going to build in what activities are we going to do in person, right? We need to structure around the ones that are going to maximize the enculturation, the collaboration, the coaching, and the feedback. Now, the second thing that I want to say about that is that there's a lot of things that happen in person that are critical for mentorship. For example, we walk out of a meeting. Now, maybe our boss says, oh, let me tell you exactly what happened in that meeting. Or when we're in that meeting, we get to see how they respond to certain things. And so one of the things that I always teach people is, if you want to be a good mentor, build in the 10 minutes after the meeting to debrief the meeting, right? Because that happens naturally when you walk back to your offices and when you walk down the hallway. We've got to start building in some of these things that allow us to have those important interactions, right? The second thing, the second larger idea is really about when we are remote, how do we signal connection, respect, and inclusion when we're in remote? And our behavior has a huge impact on that, because you are an exemplar and precedent setting. So for example, if you're a leader and you want people to be hybrid, you have to practice hybridness yourself, right? If you want people to come in the office, you can't be sitting on an island in Hawaii like I am right now, while everyone else comes in the office. So part of it starts with your behavior. Now, there's other things we can do remotely to connect people. So one of the things that I've studied is how clothing affects our behavior, how the things that we wear. So things like having, attire that everyone wears remotely that connects them to the office, right, is one way that we can increase that connection. Making sure that when even people in the office, but some people are remote, that we all do Zoom rather than some people being in person, which can create a status difference. For example, we can create common backgrounds so we all have that same connections, right? Those things matter. And then the final thing is that check-ins, I think, become really really, really important when people are remote. It is shocking how powerful and profound it is when people get a text message from their boss that says, I just want to check in and see how you're doing. I want to make sure that you have everything that you need, right? It is profoundly moving. It seems so small. So just like you want to build in that 10-minute time for check-ins, if you're a leader dealing with remote workers, you want to maybe once a week send a text message of encouragement or support for someone who's not in the office every day. And I think those things matter. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create, look, we're all going to be hybrid in the future for two reasons. One, safety, but two is a lot of people discovered the benefits of hybrid work, right? That most people live closer to their kids' school than they live to their work, right? So there's a benefit for being closer to home for lots of reasons. We save money on commuting costs. We make our schedule easier. Now, there's complicated things around parenting when you're remote, when kids are in school versus not in school. But the idea that the data are very clear. Poll after poll, internationally, nationally, say the same thing. People want a remote work option at least part of the time. And so we got to learn how to lead effectively. So what I want to end with is just these 2 points. First is, as a leader, your behavior matters, even when other people are remote. So you got to recognize, you got to model the right type of hybrid remote work behavior. You got to connect people through some type of symbols, maybe, common attire, backgrounds, and you got to check in on people to make sure they're okay. And then the second thing is you got to use your in-person time the most effectively. What are the things that we need for in-person time? We need to socialize people, we need to celebrate, we need to collaborate, and we need to give feedback. And so then, if you can't do all those things in person, you still need to build in some things. So like the idea of the check-in after the meeting that you do remotely so that you can debrief that meeting. So I hope that what I've said today has given you some insight about how you can lead more effectively in the new hybrid reality. And I'm very excited to hear from the other speakers and to answer your questions later on.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was very enlightening. Our next speaker is Anna A. Tavis, who is the Academic Director and Professor Human Capital Management at New York University. Anna?
Thank you very much. I just so much applaud the community coming together. I'm actually calling in from Park Slope in Brooklyn, and we are also a very, very connected community, and I really appreciate the effort. So, without repeating, and thank you very much, Adam, for setting the stage and kind of outlining the broad brushstrokes about what we're talking about. I actually want to be a little bit more specific and to tell you that where we are now is premature for us to make conclusions about what the workplace is going to look like. We are not at the equilibrium stage where we can say definitively what's going to happen. And let me make my case for you. First of all, the health issue is still upon us. Most of us are still expecting the boosters, and the way that disruption occurred wasn't on our terms. To Adam's very good point, we've been talking about a remote work for quite some time and playing out the different scenarios of that. But what actually happened, where we were all locked in, and all of you in New York City, which probably was at some point at the worst. So it's not the working from home. It was, really locked out of everything else available to us in the city, right? So it's too early to say. And the other thing I want to point out, and Adam outlined the kind of, again, the general frameworks in research, I do not think we can understand what is actually going on without looking at specific diversity, inclusion, and belonging issues, as we call it in academia. And that is different demographics and different groups. I think this pandemic played out differently for women in the workplace, differently for, very established high status individuals, managers who had bigger homes, second homes, or could take sabbaticals, and really enjoyed the flexibility allowed to them. And I think in my experience, because I'm in education, I think there were victims of this situation we're in, and that's young people, especially schools and even students at NYU, and I suspect Columbia as well. I think the younger generation has had the worst of it when, socialization at the school level didn't occur and young people were, stuck on their computers in the basements of their parents' homes, separated out at the most important times of their lives. So I think that we're still going through a trauma from that period. As you know, from all the data and the statistics, it's the women who had the majority of the Great Resignation occurred because of the schooling and because of caregiving responsibilities that needed to happen. They couldn't be outsourced. They had to happen in the homes. So there's just a great disparity as to how this particular situation of remote working affected people. And therefore, when I actually look at the research and the data coming out, again, you are seeing very different outcomes and very different responses. For example, I mentioned women already, and they, I think some of the latest data are telling us that for the women to achieve the level of employment that they left because of the pandemic, it will take a decade for us to make up for that loss. We do not know and can't even estimate, again, the losses that occurred for the children of this city and other places. And as you know, the drama is continuing across the country for different reasons. So what I would like to say is it's too early to say, but to Adam's point, and I think we need to be alerted to the fact that people were traumatized by this experience. The majority of people were. And to Adam's point around the importance of social capital and developing, what we've seen is really high performance on the task level of work. People were task oriented, delivering, et cetera, et cetera. What was missing out was a lot of informal connections, creativity, innovation. And just to give you some facts that point in the direction that, we are going to be back in a deliberately designed situations where, people will collaborate in person. For example, the largest real estate transactions, and I actually wrote something about it, the largest commercial real estate transactions happened in this city, and they were all investments from big technology companies. If we are promoting the thesis that everyone is going to be working remotely, why is it that Google just paid $2.2 billion for another location in the city? Same for Amazon, over $1 billion office space that Amazon acquired here, and Apple and Facebook are just around the corner. So if you're looking, and those were the largest commercial office spaces bought in this city. So there is a migration going on. And I'm trying to puzzle out what's actually going on beyond that, when we do reach the equilibrium. And I think that the companies that are basing their business model on innovation really want time in the office, not, to Adam's point, absolutely flexibility, but there will be time in the office. And why are they here and why are they not? And they're, on their campuses, let's say in Silicon Valley. And I think that the density of population, the diversity of businesses, the diversity of talent that New York City offers is a huge attraction for them. And, and we can speak in an abstract about what the workplace would look like. I want to invite you to think about specifically about this city, about how the New York model is going to work with, again, the diversity, the density, and different industries represented here, what it's going to be. And as you know, and I'm an optimist on that end, I think that the time not spent in the office is going to be spent elsewhere, but that social capital will have to be replaced or reimagined, redesigned in many different ways. And I would just say, don't rush to judgment right now. And there are different ways of making this remote situation work. But as far as our city is concerned, don't rush to the judgment about where we are going to be. Because it's going to be different, but it's going to be, in my personal very biased view, is going to be very dynamic, very diverse, and life is going to come back in a very exciting way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your comments. And now we'll look forward to comments by Tammy Sheffer. Is Tammy unmuted?
Okay, yes, hi. I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I did prepare a presentation. Is it okay for me to share screens?
Absolutely.
You should have the capability now. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yes, here we go. Wonderful. So let me pull this down. So I work at Solomon Partners. We are a boutique investment bank here in the city. It was started by Peter Solomon, who was deputy mayor to Ed Koch and has been in the city for many, many years. We have investment banking is one of those really quintessential offices where everybody has to be in. It's a lot. Historically, it's always been about face time, time in the city. And what we realized this pandemic, and I completely agree, Anna, I think there's been so many people have been really hurt more in terms of, from a work perspective, the Great Resignation that we talked about, women in particular. So there's been a lot of that. On the flip side, we've learned some different ways to work and to operate that we never would have. You would never create a pilot around this type of thing. It wouldn't even be something that people would consider. And since it was forced upon us, we had to quickly mobilize and figure out different ways to, where we can, recreate the in-person experience to the best of our ability with the tools that we had. And we have really spent I was hired at Solomon Partners the day before everybody went into quarantine. So I started on March 16th and everybody went into quarantine, and we hired, I'm very unusual for an HR person in particular, because, you want to be around people. What I will tell you is we hired about 40% of our population during the last 18 months. And we really pride ourselves on culture and access to senior people. That's our differentiator. We're not Goldman Sachs, we're not Morgan Stanley. Where we differentiate is on our excellent culture and access to clients, access to senior leaders and to learning. And so the CEO was very focused on creating very intentional experiences for people in an environment that we didn't know how long would last, and where does all of this really go? So this is our mantra in terms of the hybrid environment. We're not a remote work environment. We are a hybrid environment, meaning the younger generation is in, they are expected to be in, they're more office oriented, and the seniors are in and out a little bit, but we are creating a lot of programs around everyone to catch people on the way in, to make sure they feel connected to the firm. I think a part of the Great Resignation too, and I don't have the statistics to prove this, but anecdotally, when I speak to people, oftentimes if people have started within the last 2 years, they are very mobile. because they don't necessarily feel a connection to their employer, to the people around them. They haven't been in the office. So there is more flexibility in that person's mind, because it's not like you've been somewhere for many years and have these entrenched relationships, in particular you haven't been in the office for 2 years. So for us, we were very focused on ensuring that we were highly intentional. We were catching everyone who came into the organization and creating this really robust experience for them throughout. So we're focused on maintaining culture and connection, really developing our junior folks. What we have found is that in this year, it's harder. This is a very hands-on role. It's an apprenticeship model. It's just harder to do that virtually. And so we're really focused on development. We are investing in a lot of new technology. We have really overhauled our technology and our capability of how to connect with everybody, and just being safe. How do we create a really safe environment where people feel comfortable, they don't feel overcrowded in the office, and they know that we have their best interest at heart. So this is the model that we share with everybody. And we have shared multiple times at senior leadership meetings, town halls, everyone very transparent, same information. So for us, the hybrid model really allows, the way that we think about this is that the junior bankers are in much more often, 3-4 times a week, something like this. And that is really to network internally, to learn, to connect, to create all of those connections as much as possible. We have really started coming back, I would say, in this hybrid approach in the last 2 months. And we're month and a half, something like this. We're very careful about safety and health, but this was the intention behind everything. For the senior bankers, they're probably in 1 or 2 days a week. And when they come in, it's very scheduled, it's highly intentional. They probably wind up spending more time with their people because it's so intentional than when they used to just be in the office and bump into people. That created different moments for everybody, which I can appreciate. But this really is very intentional when they're in. It's around coaching, collaborating, and connecting. And we do a lot of work and framing around that. And I would tell you organizationally, while it's very hard to recreate moments that you have in the office, we are trying. So we are trying through these different buckets of learning and development, mentor, we organize everything, we structure everything. So we create freedom in a framework to make sure things are happening, you're capturing everybody, there's a consistency of experience. We have mentorship circles, we create a lot of master classes where we leverage our internal bankers to teach. We have external people coming in. We've really leaned into learning and development because we're trying to create different experiences along the way that, historically I think just sort of happened or sort of didn't happen. Now it's actually very planful, and we organize it so we know how it works. We survey the population. We take their feedback to iterate on everything that we do. Building social connections. This we always do try to do in person as much as possible because this is really harder to do. Virtually, although I would say during the pandemic, a lot of startups popped up and we had like gaming night and, wine tasting events. And there's just so many different ways to connect online and virtually. It was really well done actually. But we try to do all of this in person. We have new hire cohorts. So we catch you when you come in, you're part of a new hire cohort. We have culture sessions. We have wine tasting with our CEO. So we're trying to create all these touch points throughout, and we're highly communicative. We communicate through town halls every Monday morning at 9 a.m. We have a weekly meeting, 150 people get on the call, and we are constantly hiring. We have ambitions to continue to grow, and these are all whether it's learning and development or building connections or communication, these are all the forums that we put in place and we really stick to. So it's just a snippet of, I have so much, really, we've done so much over the past 18 months, more than that now, that I have so much content around this. We've really tried to do a good job about catching everybody. And we recognize this is an ongoing process. We iterate all the time, and we're always seeking feedback from our employee base. The one thing I'll say about the hybrid, which I think is nice, I don't know how you go back. I think it's fair. We certainly don't know where all of this ends, but I don't know how you go back at this point. Even for banking, where it's more of a traditional sort of work environment, if you will, people want flexibility. And you can see behind me, I mean, I have, I work from home. I have 5 kids in an apartment in Manhattan. I mean, we're all trying to manage the best that we can. This allows some additional level of flexibility without me having to ask for it. And that, I think, is really is really important. It's not perfect, but it is a model that is working for us. So I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Tammy. It certainly sounds as if your hybrid approach is working. A lot of thought has been put into it. Our final speaker is Sarah Dunn, who is the Global Human Resources Officer at Tapestry, Inc. Sarah?
Thank you, Gail. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be with you. You may not know what Tapestry is, but I'm sure you know our brands. We own Coach, Kate Spade, and Stuart Weitzman. So we are a 16,000 person organization operating in about 50 countries, but with employees in about 23 countries. And we are a very highly female organization. You only have to walk into one of our stores to know that our stores staff are majority female, but we're also majority female amongst our corporate staff, right up to our executive leadership team, our CEO, and 50% of our board. So I think that played a really powerful part in the way we've approached thinking about our people and our organization during the pandemic. And it really went back from the first days of how do we put people at the heart of our decision making, continue to pay store staff even though our entire network was closed, and provide flexible working and just the empathy and support for our working parents. The number of kids that I've seen on Zoom calls in the last 20 months has been fabulous, because it just brings home the humanity of what everybody is dealing with, what everybody has dealt with. I should also say personally, my family has dealt with it as well. I witnessed my son and his wife with their 1-year-old juggling 2 careers and childcare on a day-to-day basis. I would offer to help them more, but they chose to live in San Francisco, so that's their problem. And my daughter, actually, Tammy, what you were saying about those internet startups who are catering to the corporate world, my daughter is an actor and she actually performs Zoom murder mysteries for corporate audiences all the time. So I've seen what has happened at a personal level, while obviously directing and focusing a huge amount of my attention onto Tapestry people. And the first order of business was making sure that our people feel supported. I guess we got an early taste for this because we have staff in Wuhan in China. So when Wuhan closed down and we had our first store staff in forced quarantine, unable to leave the city, I think that was a massive wake-up call for all of us in terms of what we might be dealing with on a global basis. And maybe that gave us a few weeks of pre-prep before the nature of the pandemic really came to us in this country and in other countries. We've also obviously gone from most of our stores closed to all of our network now fully open, and having to support those store staff as they interact with the public on a day-to-day basis, keep themselves safe, keep their families safe. So we've had different populations to deal with. We have not yet fully opened our corporate offices in New York. We're located in Hudson Yards. We have, I think, now 3 times delayed our reopening as we've looked at the health and safety protocols, and frankly, how we've seen people working so well in a primarily remote basis. But we do expect to really adopt a hybrid working environment in January. We have really created persona for all of our roles, some of them fully remote. Come to the office once a quarter for a party and get to see your colleagues. A very few always on, always in, just because the nature of the work they do cannot be done remotely. That might be a seamstress, it might be a security person. And then the vast majority of our corporate population will be hybrid. And that can vary tremendously according to the job itself, ranging from 3 days a week in the office to maybe just once or twice a month in the office, but with an office presence on a regular basis, and with us expecting those workers to live within commuting distance of the office. Clearly, if you are fully remote, you can live anywhere in the US, but for hybrid, we expect people to live within commuting distance. And we've also used this opportunity to really continue the focus we have on our culture, on our values, on our purpose, on bringing community into the organization through regular outside speakers, through a huge amount of volunteering. If I tell you that Tapestry team members volunteered more hours during the pandemic than they've done in previous in-office times, I think that speaks to the nature of the community and culture we have created. And I think that is binding us together very strongly. And I will touch wood at this point, we are not really experiencing the Great Resignation. We have got very manageable turnover. We've got a high engagement level. We've been able to give people new opportunities to be mobile in their careers, and we've hired a significant number of people during the pandemic. But I think it all comes back to this people-centered approach, recognizing that everybody's hair is on fire. We decided that we'd finish work at 1 p.m. on Fridays, give people a little bit of extra time to spend with their families. Recognizing that people were going cross-eyed with Zoom meetings, we created something called Unstructured Time. Twice a week, there are no meetings after 4 p.m. We're still expecting people to work, but they're doing their individual work, catching up. And maybe that means they're not having to encroach on their personal time. Clearly, work-life balance, when your screen, your office is maybe in the same room as your family, let alone in the same building, you need time where you can switch off and focus on yourself, focus on your family. So we tried to create these opportunities where people feel they've got time to recharge. Clearly, it has been a very stressful time. So focusing on mental wellness, on wellness programs, we have a corporate subscription with Headspace, which we find our teams find really helpful from a just mental wellness point of view, and just trying to make sure we are encouraging people to look after the whole person. But, all that being said, as we're not fully reopening till January, the future is ours to write. And we say constantly, we are going to test and learn. Many companies have redesigned their workspace during this time. Their employees are going back to totally new environments. Now, to be fair, we had a very new environment just before lockdown. We'd only just moved into Hudson Yards. So we decided not to do any physical redesign until we had tested what hybrid working is really going to look like. How often are people going to be in? How much flexibility do they need? But I can certainly see a future where this office space is not those crowded ranks and banks of desks that we've been used to over the years, but is much more the collaborative, storytelling, emotionally connecting spaces that will attract people to come in for community and collaborative events. And clearly there is some work that it is much more suited to be doing hybrid versus in person. I will tell you, it is difficult to design a handbag and create a sample if you are not physically present in the same room as the teams you need to collaborate with. So we are very keen to get people back into our collaborative environment, but to give them the flexibility to work remotely when they need to. And, I think, Adam, you were talking about, the nature of work, the Zoom protocols. In some ways, when everyone's remote, Zoom is easy. It's much harder when you've got half and half, some people in the office, some people on Zoom. So we're very deliberately training leaders on how to run hybrid Zoom meetings. We're investing in the technology to create collaborative work tools. Some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with things like Microsoft Teams, that just create a much more collaborative workplace in a virtual environment. I think we're some years away yet from the metaverse, but at least I hope so, because it terrifies me. But who knows where collaborative tools are going to go in the future, when we think about a work metaverse as well as a sort of personal life metaverse. So lots of interesting things ahead of us. And I can't remember who said it, sure as heck, we're not going back. Life will work is never going to be the same again. But I honestly don't think we know quite where it is going yet. And so this sort of test and learn, frequent listening, we are pulsing our teams all the time to understand how they're feeling. I think that will increase even more as we move back into the hybrid environment. And to the speakers who spoke about the impact that this can have on inclusion, absolutely key that there is no first tier, second tier on hybrid or remote, or that this does not disadvantage any particular part of the population. And I think one of the things we're proudest of actually is that our employee resource groups have got a louder voice today, even louder voice today than they did before the pandemic. Our Working Parents ERG has really been instrumental in having us increase emergency childcare support, for instance. And so the advocacy and the visibility of our diverse population, I think, is so important as we think about what we want our culture to be in the morning, in the future. And I think the other thing, it sounds more prosaic, but obviously it's just as important, the health and safety point of view. This is going to be something we live with for some time. We are expecting a fully vaccinated workforce in our offices, but recognize there will be some testing for some accommodations. And we're eagerly awaiting what the OSHA requirements are going to be so that we understand what we have to put into place, both in our offices, but also in each of our stores throughout the US. And I actually take hope, again, from a personal point of view. You can tell that I'm not a native of these shores. So I do spend some time in the UK. And one of the things that excites me so much about the UK at the moment is their adoption of rapid testing. Any UK citizen can walk into a pharmacy and get free rapid testing kits that they can administer themselves. Yes, it requires a certain amount of honesty, but it does create a much safer environment, both for social and for working, that I hope we will see that availability come rapidly here. It's not quite here yet, and the adoption is slower, but hoping that will also give us a better way of controlling safety going forward. So I do think this is the grand experiment, hybrid working, and we are going to learn a lot. Perhaps we reconvene in 6 months' time and we will have learned even more, but it's certainly been interesting to hear from Tammy, from Adam, and from Anna. And I think we're all sharing very similar thoughts, and it's going to be a very interesting time to see what comes to fruition. So thank you. I was thrilled to be included.
Thank you so much. Peggy?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to all four of you for your fascinating comments. We'd like to see if members of the public have questions for our audience. And if you do, could you click the reactions button on your screen and then click the raised hand function? Are there any questions that we can pose to the audience?
We have one raised hand from Rita Popper. Confirm unmuting, Rita.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentations. They were absolutely wonderful. I am retired, so I don't feel that I'm in this hybrid. I'm more of an observer of it. I do have children who are in this. Do you think it's too early at this point to really evaluate whether we're going to cut our office spaces down, whether we, how we interact? It all looks great on paper. Do people need workers need to have some feedback, immediate feedback from not only the people that they're working with, but even other people in the peripheral where a good job is noted by a lot of people? It really encourages people. I can tell that the buses are crowded. I live in New York City. The trains are still not crowded. And so I wonder about what is happening. But do you think that this is a little bit too early to be able to say definitely what we think for the future?
Anna, you can confirm unmuting. Adam, you are unmuted.
Adam, do you want to jump in, or I can share?
You can go first.
Okay. Rita, really excellent points. And I think it was Sarah who said that there's not going to be the same office to go back to. It's not going to be rows of cubicles. And if those of you just make a little trip to Hudson Yards and look at I was just actually there at a meeting, and it's incredible how vibrant it is and how much the workplace has changed. I have had fascinating conversations with architects and real estate people. And what they're saying to me is that they've never been as busy as they're now. And what they're doing now, they are thinking, yes, there will not be as much 9 to 5 in the cubicle in the workplace where people were packed in. But in fact, there may be in the hybrid model a greater need for space, because there will be these new environments that they're building. Just the regulations alone, ventilation codes and air circulation and no touch elevators and doors, etc. There's so much innovation that's happening right now in the office space community, that I think we're going to see something very different that will be very attractive to people to go back to. Sarah, again, to your point, for creative purposes, right? So in terms of space, the space is not going to go away, but we're not going to go back to the cubicle, that's for sure.
Yeah, and to follow up that, first of all, I shouldn't have let Anna go first because she basically said what I was going to say, but more eloquently. But I think that one thing, there's a great quote that someone said that I saw recently, which is said, I used to work at my office and have my social life at home, but now I work at home and have my social life at the office. And so I think that one of the things that Anna's bringing up is this idea that we're going to need space, but we're going to need different types of space, right? We're not going to sort of cram people in. We're going to have more wide open spaces, more interaction spaces. And I think it comes down a little bit to, what Tammy was saying a little bit about, the junior people will probably be coming into the office more frequently because they need more hands-on mentorship. Senior people will be coming in, maybe a couple of times a week, but they're not going to be working. They're going to be mentoring, they're going to be coaching, they're going to be consulting, they're going to be collaborating. And so I think that what's going to really happen is a lot of people are going to do exactly that. I'm going to do my writing, my concentrating, my reports at home or remotely where I can really focus. And then the workplace is really going to be for that high energy interactions and using that more effectively. So just as I described this idea that how do we, make the hybrid world more effective, I think Tammy and Salomon Brothers are doing exactly that by thinking about the structure of who needs to be in the office when and making that. And the final thing I just want to say is, Rita said, is it too soon? Anna said, we're not at equilibrium yet. Tammy mentioned, this was this incredible experiment. We never would have done these pilot studies without this, right? And so I think the other thing just to recognize is that we're going to keep learning. We're going to keep evolving. This is why I was so excited to come to this symposium today, is because I personally learned so much from, Sarah, Ann, and Tammy. I'm giving a lecture tomorrow, and I'm already, I have a whole page of notes that I've written down, and I'm going to borrow some of the ideas that I heard today, because I think we're all learning from each other. We don't have the answers yet. And what's the answer for Salomon Brothers might not be the answer for Tapestry and Coach and other places. And so we have to really think about, I think Sarah said it best. We have to think about the task and the people simultaneously. And we want to focus on what tasks need to be done where, but not forget that there's status hierarchies and differences. And we have to take into account that some groups don't have the same benefits of other groups in terms of their remote spaces, et cetera.
I would just add one thing, just to, interestingly, again, investment banking being is very traditional. Everybody buys to want to be the partner and have the office. We've taken away offices for the MDs, for the managing directors. The most senior people used to have an office. They'd come in every day, they'd go to an office, they knew what they were doing. We no longer, we did reconfigure the space. We do have offices, but nobody has an assigned office. If you're coming in, you have to let us know, you have to book an office. The people who have assigned space, it's really their own space, and they can make it their own, are the junior folks. They're coming in much more frequently. So we are reconfiguring the space. We have more common space for people to network, for people to sit together, and of course, collaborative space and all of that. But we are really using the space differently. I do think it's early days. We are still figuring all of this out, as everybody here said. But I will tell you, I do think the hybrid model, I have a lot of friends who are introverts, and they would tell me this hybrid model is like, thank God. It was too much, before, it's a more fair model, I think, in terms of just allowing different people to have different styles, different ways, and maybe it decreases stress for some. For extroverts who want to be in the office more, and that's where they get their energy, they can do that. So we'll see, but we are really making a lot of changes to the physical space, and I hope creating more balance for people.
Thank you very much. I see that Mary Brayback had her hand up. I don't know if she's still there. Is Mary
I can
Brayback?
confirm unmuting Mary if you'd like to speak. Okay.
Yeah, I am still here, and I really appreciate this conversation. I think it's extremely timely, and I greatly value your discussion about gender in this new environment, because I think it's the experience of working online at home for women is quite greatly different from the experience of men, because of our responsibilities for childcare and elder care and all the other kinds of care. And the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report came out this year, and the United States ranks 30th out of 156 countries. So the gender issue is enormous. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the workplace is doing regarding this issue of women's responsibility for care and the absence of childcare in our society, and how that is going to affect what you talked about as the hierarchy of workspaces. I think this hierarchy issue is extremely sensitive and important. And I'll add just one other point, and that is that I was in academic administration for many, many years, and I know that space is never about space, it's about worth and value and hierarchy, and how gender and the hierarchy of space allotment is going to affect these new work environments. Really appreciate your reflections on that.
I want to say one thing really quickly, and I personally want to hear from Sarah and Tammy, since they're dealing with this, in that. But I just want to say very, very quickly that gender is a very complicating factor, because when you look at surveys that are done, sometimes the remote is incredibly beneficial for working parents because they live closer to the school. It cuts down their commute. When their kids are homeschooling, that's when you see the huge gender difference where women really suffer. So the gender issue is incredibly important, but it's not so black and white and so straightforward because it's incredibly complicated by both the benefits and constraints that remote work offer. And I'll shut up now.
Sarah?
Yes, look, I mean, this is clearly something that we are very passionate about, both with the makeup of our workforce and our customer base. And there are clear differences. You can see it on your Zoom screens every day. So much of the burden of childcare has fallen to women, but actually, in our organization, we've seen our male colleagues also taking part in childcare and being very vocal in parental groups. So I'm very hopeful that this pandemic will actually, in some ways, over time, start to reduce the gender differences. The key issue is the amount and the quality of professional childcare that is available in this country. And that is something that we need to address at a societal level. While there is good quality childcare available, it tends to be out of the pocket reach of many people, and there just is not enough of it. So helping our employees, at least with emergency childcare, as well as giving them the flexibility to organize their work when needed around their childcare, I think is going to be very important.
It looks like we have some more input that people want to give, but I just want to remind us that it's about 7:30 and Rebecca Seawright is also here, so I will defer to you.
Okay, will you let Anna?
Can we just take one question more and move on?
I think,
Anna?
Peggy, that Anna had a comment on the last question. And if she could do that, and then we'll take one more
I
question.
just do really quickly, Mary. Thank you for your question. I think we also, in addition to childcare, et cetera, we really need to rethink some of the core HR, fundamental processes of who we promote, why, et cetera. And I think the situation where a lot of empathy, a lot of kind of more holistic, human-centric attention needed to be paid to employees, even the health issues, et cetera, makes us think about how do we accommodate these diverse career paths. I think Tammy and Sarah, I'm sure you're thinking about it because, our HR processes have been quite relentless around promotions like partnership track, right? Is just totally unforgiving of women. I know personally, because my daughter is an attorney, I know so many women had to get off that partner track in the law firms because of the situation. So anyway, it goes both ways, requiring a childcare, but also rethinking how we accommodate the fact that people could be parents at the same time as they're making their careers.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from our attendees?
Can I ask a real quick question and then we'll move on? But to what extent can employees influence their company's policies about full-time work versus remote work versus whatever arrangement they have? I mean, how much say do employees get? And is it more than in the past? Sarah?
Okay. So great question, and I hope that it is going to be a discussion and a collaboration. However, we did start with our personas of the work that needed to be done. But as I said, almost all of our workers, our employees, fit into that hybrid work, and the variation between in the office 3 days a week to in the office twice a month, that's going to be much more at the discretion of the employee and the manager, and a discussion of what suits that particular group. There will not be a company-wide mandate on that. And then, as I've already said, we'll test and learn. There's got to be performance, there's got to be completion of work. So what works for one might not work for somebody else. So we're taking a pretty personal approach to this and giving the employees quite a lot of freedom to choose.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending this extremely important and timely topic of remote versus in-person working. Your comments were incredibly helpful and very interesting. So thanks again, and really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for all of you for attending the meeting so far. The second portion of our meeting addresses a crisis that we're facing, the growing legal threats to abortion. As we know, the right to choose is the very cornerstone of women's rights, but according to NPR, more abortion restrictions have been enacted across the US this year than in any previous year. Thus, the question before us is, how can we as a community help preserve this fundamental right? Gail?
Well, in response to the anti-abortion laws in Texas and across the country, interestingly, Governor Hochul has announced an agenda to cement New York State as a safe harbor for those seeking abortion care. I understand that there's going to be a robust information campaign moving forward, which will address a woman's right to choose and provide access to high quality reproductive care. We're fortunate to have Assemblywoman Rebecca Seawright with us this evening. She's always advocated for women's rights and all the issues that impact their lives. I'd like to turn the program over to Assemblywoman Seawright and ask, as Peggy did, what can we as a community do going forward?
Well, thank you. It's great to be joining you all this evening, and thank you especially to our co-chairs, Gail and Peggy, and all the dedicated Community Board 8 members, constituents, and guests. I'm pleased to be with you and have the opportunity to participate in this important conversation on the fundamental right that is under siege in my home state of Texas. And unfortunately, with copycat laws emerging in Florida and other parts of the country. In my brief remarks this evening, I'll cover the national landscape and its implications for New York and share some thoughts with you about how we might better shape our message before talking about what New York can do to support abortion rights and access. I previously worked back in the 1980s in Washington, D.C. for my mentor, former employer, Sarah Weddington, who Peter Patch, I see, is on tonight, also knows Sarah Weddington. She argued Roe versus Wade when she was 23 years old and is still thought to be the youngest person ever to argue and win a case before the United States Supreme Court in Roe versus Wade. She was asked to argue it twice for Nixon's new appointees to the court. In 2019, in the New York State Legislature, we codified Roe versus Wade and passed the Reproductive Health Act. And I was so honored and pleased to have Sarah Weddington in the chamber and pass a proclamation in her honor. However, it was not without attack from the opposition and the other party, but it was wonderful to have her there at a press conference as we signed the 2019 Reproductive Health Act. Earlier today, I attended a meeting of the bipartisan pro-choice legislative caucus of 104 active legislators. Out of 150 assembly members and 63 New York State senators, only 104 are actively members of the bipartisan pro-choice caucus. So when we think about what can we do, we can write those legislators, assembly members and senators that are not a member of the bipartisan pro-choice caucus. I'd like to see that number grow, especially when we think of New York as a progressive state and a leader on so many fronts. There have been nearly 600 abortion restriction laws, including 165 bans introduced across 47 states since 2021. 106 of those restrictions have been enacted across 19 states, including 10 bans. We have struggled over many decades to achieve and secure this right, the right of a woman to exercise her free will and be able to choose. But you cannot choose if you do not have access to safe, available, and affordable legal choice of medical care. New York is the national leader in providing access to safe abortion services. We are protected here in New York, as I mentioned, with the signing of the 2019 Reproductive Health Act that codified Roe versus Wade. But once again, opponents of this right are seeking to expand their attacks on women. As we've seen, what happened in Texas will not stay in Texas. The Texas law is one of the most restrictive in the nation. The law, which was passed in May and went into effect in September, says that any pregnancy with a heartbeat that is detected cannot be aborted. That effectively means that if you're 6 weeks pregnant, you cannot have an abortion in the state of Texas. This law makes no exceptions for rape, sexual abuse, or incest, incentivizes the public to police abortions. It allows people to sue an abortion provider or anyone else that is suspect in aiding or abetting abortions after that 6-week mark. What Texas is doing is unconstitutional in my view. We must continue to fight to protect what we have achieved under Roe versus Wade. Part of that fight is to work harder on how we communicate and message our cause. As our caucus discussed today in the Assembly, each patient should be able to get an abortion and care in their community with dignity and respect. Inclusive of women, transgender, and gender non-binary persons, we must support access to the full range of reproductive health care, including birth control and maternity care. Last month, I stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the Women's Rights Pioneers Monument in Central Park with our new governor, Kathy Hochul, colleagues and advocates to affirm abortion rights. As Gail mentioned earlier, Governor Hochul is united in her support of a plan that she was recently released to make sure that New York State remains a safe harbor for those seeking abortion care. Some of these initiatives include a plan to launch a public information campaign so New Yorkers and those who come here will know all of their rights they have in relation to abortion access and to create a patient's Bill of Rights. We must also respond with action in New York State that includes new legislation that I've co-sponsored. 3 bills in the Assembly in particular that would create a fund that would support abortion access, establish insurance coverage parity for abortion procedures, and ensure that our schools provide comprehensive sex education. 2 years ago, I joined with our Democratic majority to pass a law that guarantees abortion remains legal in New York State, even if the Trump conservative United States Supreme Court succeeds in tearing down the landmark Roe versus Wade. I'm the prime sponsor in the Assembly of the Equal Rights Amendment in the New York State Constitution that would prohibit discrimination against pregnant women, spelled out in the bill. I agree with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand that we must pass a National Women's Health Protection Act, which would create federal protections against state restrictions that fail to protect women's health and intrude upon personal decision-making. The Women's Health Protection Act would permit healthcare providers to provide abortion services without limits or requirements that single out the provision of abortion services. It would also promote access to abortion services and women's ability to participate equally in the economic and social life of the United States. Once again, I commend Governor Hochul for directing the State Department of Health immediately and widely distributing modern and comprehensive provider guidance on the right to abortion care and the right to provide it. But technology is constantly advancing. We must ensure that updates to existing regulations are adopted so that medication abortion can be more easily accessed during telehealth visits. New York is a leader in providing the highest level of medical care, but to remain a leader, we must continue to ensure that reproductive rights of all are protected. And so again, I thank you so much for choosing this as a topic this evening that the community board is dedicated to. It's such an important issue now that we're seeing all around the country it being attacked and Roe versus Wade being slowly whittled away.
Thank you so much for your comments. And I see that Sherry Weiner has a question. Can you unmute her, Saida?
Hi, thank you, Assembly Member Seawright. That was a wonderful overview of the mess we're in concerning abortion rights. But a question, I think you said that, all right, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, can a state then pass protections that were originally given? In other words, can a state override a Supreme Court decision? That's what I'm a little confused. Yeah, how would that work?
Well, and New York has always been a progressive state, and before Roe versus Wade was passed, the attorney Sarah Weddington actually came to New York and slept on a couch to do all of her research for Roe versus Wade. And there was actually a legislator that lost his career, a Republican that cast his vote in New York. And so one of the reasons we passed the 2019 Reproductive Health Act was to put assurances in state law in New York, irrespective of what the federal Constitution or what the federal Supreme Court says. Now, there's going to always be challenges. Right now, we're waiting on the case before the Texas case. It was ruled that individuals didn't have standing, but the United States Justice Department had standing. So we're waiting to see. Unless there's one vote changed, it doesn't look promising.
No, unfortunately not. Great. I'm glad you're leading the fight in New York. And I'm glad you
Thank you, Sharon.
You're ours. And I'm glad you are our Assembly member. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Rita Popper has a question.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Seawright. I think you're incredible. You have always stood for women's rights. And I don't mean to be, I'm not being comical in what I'm about to say, but it's been in my heart and I'm going to say it anyhow, is that people are telling what women can do with their bodies, which now women did not get pregnant by themselves. It takes two people, and no legislation is ever directed toward men, and there is a solution. In my utopian world, is that every man who has fathered two children has to have a vasectomy. I know that sounds crazy, but if we can't have an abortion, don't get us pregnant. So, I mean, it comes out of, incest and everything else. That's violence. But even those people, if a man has sired two children, he must have vasectomy so that he will not father anymore, and neither will his wife be subject to abortions, or his girlfriend, or his mistress, or whatever. There's got to be something for women to stand up and say, wait a second, guys. It's not only on us, and you've put it all on us. What about a shared responsibility? I know it's a harebrained, but it's the only thing I can think of. They're not going to take a bill.
We also have a raised hand from Peter.
Thank you.
I may regret that this session is being taped, but I want to
Sorry, excuse me.
What you just said, Rita, with some hesitation, to be sure. But I also want to add one other suggestion. it's long been quite apparent to me that men think they have a particular insight to how women should manage their bodies. And I always had a bit of a problem with that. I thought maybe women should be those most responsible and perhaps insightful in making those decisions. But as long as men want to decide how women should control your bodies, I think the people who should be allowed to vote on your proposal should be restricted to women. Having said that, and I mean, it's a little lighthearted, but I do have this. The underlying point actually is my concern about men making the decisions on behalf of women. And the second thing I'd raise, and I don't know who may have points on this, but this is a case, and there's several right now, the abortion rights thing, the voting rights issues, the suppression of voting rights, and so on. That I think we need to think more rigorously about how we, as part of a local community, can be a voice in those larger national kind of contests. And I look forward to anyone who has particular suggestions on how we might go about that.
Well, thank you, Peter. I have a question for each of you. What do you see as the greatest need to reproductive health care in this community on the Upper East Side and Roosevelt Island, including birth control, maternity care, full range of reproductive rights? And then I think that will help tailor the answer to what, as individuals, that we can do as activists and as community board members. So what do you see as the greatest need in the community?
Would anybody like to respond to that? Valerie, you have your hand up so we can.
Well, if I may respond, I think it's affordable access to women's health care, anything from abortion to just general illness. The concern that we won't be able to afford abortions or any other procedure we want is very disconcerting. We should all be able to afford adequate health care. So that would be my input on this. And before we go on, I just want to throw out an idea and then we'll get back to other people. But I'm wondering if our committee wants a resolution, doesn't want a resolution, doesn't need a resolution. How, as a community board, should we respond? Valerie, was that something you were going to talk about, or?
No, I wasn't going to talk about how we were going to respond. I mean, first I'll respond to Rebecca's request. I think one of the most interesting things, I have a lot of friends who are very interested, who are very active. I think everyone's very interested, but very active in this area across the country. And I think living in New York, we lose sight of what's happening in the rest of the country. And interestingly enough, you know, when Rebecca says, what can we do here? You know, let's not focus. You never have to get to the abortion if you're focused at the very beginning. And I think what's missing is an emphasis on, you know, access to contraception, sex education. I know that a lot of my friends who are active in this across the country, most women can go well beyond the first trimester and not even know that they're pregnant, and therefore fall subject to a lot of these restrictions on abortion. And some of us may be rolling our eyes saying, how can that be possible? But it is very possible. A lot of my friends who are very active, you know, flying doctors into, I mean, I think at one point, I don't know, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, Texas only had like 2 abortion clinics in the entire state, and women are being flown out of state, and doctors are being flown in under cover of night to perform what would have been, until this law came into being, legal, but abortions on the edge, if you will. So that, you know, people could come within the time limits. But I think a lot of these cases, you know, if you start early and you understand, I think over the course of this debate, all through my life, It started out that the argument against abortion was that people were going to use it like contraception. And because of greater access to abortion and sex education and access to moderately priced contraception and free contraceptives, that has really decreased. And you don't see abortion being used as a mode of birth control by anybody. So I think that's really helpful. But again, I think living in New York, we're very jaded. We don't realize how difficult it is to get an abortion in many states. And quite frankly, I think it's very dangerous to rely on the future of Roe v. Wade, and the emphasis should be obtaining a national right to abortion, whether that's through the Equal Rights Amendment and at the federal level, where most Americans can agree on this one subject, that women have a right to abortion. I think if only we could get past infrastructure, this might be something that both sides of the aisle could agree on with some restrictions. So that's all I want to say. I mean, I'm happy and I feel blessed that I live in New York State, where everyone has a right to get an abortion. I do believe that that's a woman's last choice, that's not something she wakes up in the morning and says, well, things go wrong, that's what I want to do. But I think it's very important to have women have access to safe abortions. Women who are well off have always had that right. And so we're really talking about protecting the most vulnerable women in our society. Thanks.
Rita?
I think it starts even earlier. I think it starts with education in schools. And just by the mere fact that we have a growing population of young high school students who are parents. And it comes with all kinds of voodoo things in religions that you can't, if you use a contraceptive for a woman, that you will have high blood pressure, so on and so forth. There has to be a better way to do this. I believe in France, which is a Catholic country, that I know that abortions are legal there. And I don't believe that they have the amount of teenage mothers that we have. I think we need to ask around and find out from other countries how they do this and what they do. And again, I think that women have got to stand up and fight against men telling them what they can do with their bodies. Thank you.
Vanessa?
Hi there. Yes, I just wanted to add a comment that I think the past two speakers added, that in response to Assemblymember Seawright's question about what is a need in our community, I think we need to really consider comprehensive sex education, which is not mandated in New York public schools and is something that affects the women and families in our community, and also beyond our community, right? Because we don't know where the children who are currently in our community will end up, when they become adults. So also, since raising my hand, I think we've also talked about, or the idea of a resolution has come about. I don't know if anyone has proposed anything yet, but I would suggest including our support for comprehensive sex education in whatever we propose.
Might I interrupt for just a second? The Assemblywoman talked about 3 bills that are currently being circulated. And is there a way that we could support all 3? Because one, I believe, was comprehensive sex education in schools. Another had to do with funding for abortions, and then insurance parity. Would you think that that might be a way to proceed? Just creating
You're
support
asking me?
from the.
Let's do it.
Okay.
So I'll just weigh in quickly. So these are 3 bills that I'm a co-sponsor of, and I think it would be great if your resolution, called for their passage. The other thing is, I mentioned that we only have 104 members of the legislative bipartisan pro-choice legislative caucus, and in the Senate, it's chaired by our own Senator Liz Krueger, and a nurse in the Assembly, Karina Reyes. And so for those of you that have family that live in a more conservative district than the Upper East Side, ask them to check and see if their legislator is a member. I know some people have second homes in New York State. Check and see if the legislator that you have access to through a family member or second home is a member of the bipartisan pro-choice legislative caucus. New York is a progressive state and a national model on abortion rights, and yet we only have 104 members together from the Senate and the Assembly that make up the bipartisan pro-choice legislative caucus. So I would say, write the legislators. And next year is an election year for state officials, and so insist that they're co-sponsoring and supporting, especially in the climate that we're in right now. So maybe your resolution could call for support of the agenda of the bipartisan pro-choice legislative caucus, which includes these 3 bills that we talked about.
And is
Since
the
I'm still
I'm sorry, are the 3 bills part one comprehensive bill, or the 3 separate bills?
They're 3 separate bills. And I can get you a copy of the bills.
Thank you.
That would be great. Elaine?
I just wanted to say, in the New York City school system, there is supposed to be sex education. It's not enforced, and it is not done. And what many of the schools have done is refer or ask community-based groups to come in and do this. So I think it's important that we proceed with the legislation that's at place, but we also need to turn immediately to the Board of Education and hold them accountable, because it is required in all of the schools. I don't know, not kindergarten probably, but I know, having run school-based programs for 25 to 30 years, that we were doing that work and also referring and getting other groups to come in and do it. So I think there's an accountability also on our local level to even look not just at our own school district, but what's happening at the Board of Education that is failing to do the health education with the sex education. As we all know, if we want to look at health, they don't have gym, they don't have recreation, etc. So the local school districts are in violation of the education law. So I'd like to see something like that, maybe not rolled into what we're going to do as a motion, but the committee, maybe along with health services and youth, if they could all work together to question what the Board of Education is doing. Thank you.
And also, Elaine, I'll just point out that, we're going to have a new mayor come January. So, the mayor could be appointing a new chancellor of the New York City school system. And that's something that we as a community should be questioning now. What's the position of the mayoral candidates and the other city officials? It's a unique time in that we've got a new governor, we'll be having a new mayor, and basically a new city council. So we have to get this on the radar.
Thank you. Excellent.
Alita?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if I was unmuted. It strikes me that some of these anti-abortion states are also not totally opposed to sexual assault on women. If you look at Alabama, they like Texas, it doesn't allow, I think, or their goal is not to allow abortion, even in the context of rape, and to provide paternal rights to rapists, which is a really horrifying thought. So I think that actions in favor or allowing choice also have to do with sexual assault in some way. They're just intertwined. And that just leads me to my last point, which is that in other states, Connecticut, I know of, they require sex education about how to behave in college, because most sexual assaults in college occur between the time of drop-off and Thanksgiving of freshman year. So people don't know what to expect. They're let loose. There's a lot of freedom there. And so obviously there are bills, so we can't interject anything, but just to think about the idea of mandating sex education for college in high school, because the state doesn't know what colleges are going to teach. And because young women are assaulted more often in the early part of college, that's just a suggestion for some later time. I just had to voice the idea, unfortunately, of the power of sexual assault. So that's all. Thank you for listening. I don't know if I made any sense.
You absolutely did. And what's going on college campuses is, absolutely, I think we need to strengthen our laws around sexual assault and sexual harassment. Recently I was reading where at one of our public universities, this is more in line with the earlier topic that you had tonight on Zoom, where I picked up some valuable tips, but a professor was teaching a class on Zoom, took a break, had sex with a partner, and it was all on Zoom accidentally. And so now the person has been removed out of a classroom, but it was in the paper. And so the topic that you had earlier tonight about Zoom, and working virtually or working in the office is an important subject as well. So I just meant to comment earlier on the subject that you covered.
Thank you so much.
Vanessa, do you have your hand up again?
Hi, yes, thanks again. Just wanted to move that we pass a resolution for the committee, speaking to the, so as the assembly member language that the assembly member suggested, sorry, I'm a little out of sorts tonight. So supporting the bipartisan pro-choice commission. And it's a legislative
caucus
and caucus. Thank you. And its agenda, including the passage of the 3 bills that were mentioned.
Second.
Sherry.
Okay. Sherry, did you want to say something?
No, I wanted to second. I think it's an excellent idea. I think we should go on record. And I'm sure the assembly member can give us all the specifics as to the numbers and what language we should be putting into it. And I'm not sure we're going to be able to get it for tomorrow night, but
well, actually, unfortunately, we will have to get it for tomorrow night. So any information that we can get first thing in the morning would be very helpful, because we will have to write up the minutes of the meeting, including the resolution, first thing in the morning in time for tomorrow night's meeting.
Rebecca, who should they speak to in your office?
Corey Hassan. And I'll be in touch with him tonight to make sure that we have you the bills and the agenda to put in your resolution. And so do you think the full board will go along with what you're doing tonight in your proposed resolution?
Well, we have half of the board here tonight, so.
All right, great.
I'm optimistic that they will.
Good.
Absolutely. Good. Should we take a vote from the committee members who are here and other CB8 board members as well? Saida, could you call the roll?
Or do we want to just do it that whoever, if anyone is opposed, they
Yeah,
can.
why don't you
Just
do
if
it?
that's, we'll do it that way. Sure.
Okay. So if you vote no, abstaining, not voting for cause, you can raise your hand. Taina's hand is raised.
Hi, everyone. So I'm not abstaining or not voting. I just had a clarifying question, which is if the Assemblywoman could repeat just really quickly sort of the summary of the three bills, please.
Sure. One of the bills is by Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, and it basically provides more insurance coverage for access to medical reproductive care. The second bill mandates sex education, and the third provides a dedicated funding stream for access to reproductive care, medical care in New York State.
Okay, thank you so much. That was all, my only point.
Also, I just, before I forget, want to point out, my office held 3 booster clinics in the community office, and we just secured today 2 more dates because it's been booked out. So on Friday, November 5th and Friday, November 12th, we'll be offering the Pfizer booster shot and the third dose of Moderna.
Excellent. And Saida, can you make sure that Will knows those dates so that the community can be aware of when?
Rebecca, did you have a question?
I wasn't sure if we were starting the voting, but I had my hand up just in response to the question about whether, how we would feel or what we thought the board would do when this came to the full board tomorrow. So one thing I can say is we should include the language of those 3 bills either in the minutes or make sure they're accessible, because I have a feeling that that question will come up.
Thank you.
And I think I should just read the names of everyone present into the record. Okay, we have Elizabeth Ashby, Gail Barron, Alita Camp, Rebecca Dangor, Lori Boris, Ed Hartzog, Elaine Walsh, Peter Patch, Rita Popper, Sandria Coleman, Sherry Weiner, Taina Borrero, Valerie Mason, and Vanessa Aronson. Okay. We have a raised hand from someone in the public. Can you confirm unmuting and identify yourself?
Hey, it's Russell Squire. Sorry, I didn't realize I was not identified. So I'm also voting yes.
Is anyone opposed to the resolution? Would they kindly raise their hand if they are abstaining or opposing the bill, the resolution?
I don't believe so.
Raised hands.
Okay. I want to thank you all. I'm going to jump on another Zoom, but thank you all for doing this resolution, and we'll get you the information.
Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, all of your help and support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like this passed unanimously, and thank you very much. We will be taking this up again tomorrow night at the full board meeting. And also, we'd like to thank you very much for attending tonight. This was a fascinating meeting, and I think we all learned quite a lot. So really appreciate your being here.
And is there any old business, or if not, any new business? If not, can we have a motion to adjourn?
Thumbs up from Taina, raised hand from Rebecca.
Okay. Thank you all. As Peggy said, we very much appreciate everybody attending, and I hope you found the entire meeting informative and interesting, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.